in diplomacy, its expression is called the non-bloc. The leader of which was Sukarno, Nehru. Now it was good. We have successfully sailed the country under the currents of the former Cold War. Now the new Cold War. Yeah. Will the principle you have elaborated in the implication of the question in your lecture just now, but what is the new method of this so-called independency and neutrality? I like very much when you said that this great power competition is not only a challenge. It's not only, does not pose problem all the time, but it also provides new possibilities for countries like Indonesia. What are those kind of possibilities and what kind of method that we can use to reap the most benefit from US-China competition in order to make the country and the region better positioned and stronger? That's the first question. I still have the second question, but after you answer the first question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I must say thank you very much for telling me what Mr. Hatta said, how you're going to sail between two coral reefs. I think that's still the right philosophy for Indonesia to adopt vis-a-vis US and China, maintain good ties with both, and do not become an enemy to either. And that would, and frankly, it would also help ASEAN if Indonesia can navigate a good cause between the two. Now you're right, in the first Cold War, there was a strong non-aligned movement that was started by President Sukarno, by Nehru, by Tito. But the difference now is that there is no longer a non-aligned movement. I mean, there is one on paper, but it's not really that strong a force as it used to be in the time of President Sukarno and so on and so forth. But I can tell you that even though at that time there was a non-aligned movement, I attended a non-aligned summit meeting in Havana, Cuba in 1979. And you know, Cuba was very close to the Soviet Union at that time. And at that summit meeting, the president of Sri Lanka said very wisely, he said, listen, we all claim to be non-aligned countries. He said, actually, there are only two non-aligned countries in the world. United States, Soviet Union. The rest of us, we are all aligned in one way. And so that was actually a very clever statement by his part. And he was right, because you know, everybody else, all of us. So even within the current non-aligned movement, there are countries that are closer to United States, and there are countries that are closer to China. So from Indonesia's point of view, Indonesia would help Southeast Asia a lot by becoming good friends with both United States and with China, and that should also be the ASEAN philosophy. We want to be good friends with the United States, we want to be good friends with China. And by the way, I did publish an article in the magazine Foreign Affairs this year in March and April. You can go to my website, mahbubani.net, and download that article, because in that article I call it Asia's Third Way. And I say Asia's third way is to maintain good ties with the United States, maintain good ties with China. And I explain why that is the wisest thing to do. I think that is what I would say, that we should heed the advice of Mr. Hatta.
Thank you. The second question before I go to the floor. In the next 2 decades, let's talk a little bit about long term. Do you think the basic course of the last, what happened during the Cold War before, let's say after the Second World War, we were born right after the Second World War, or before the end of the Second World War, and up to 78 years. Now what happens from the Second World War to today? An era we can call Pax Americana, or the system of liberal world order led by the United States. What happened during these long decades? was the re-emergence of Japan after the crushing defeat, the emergence of Germany to become a stable, rich, and democratic society. After that, we see Taiwan, we see South Korea, we see Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. First, poor, authoritarian, and became democratic, rich, and stable, including us in the last 25 years. Now, whatever the reasons behind this long-term plan, one of the most important was there is this security umbrella, also trade system that was established in the last 70 years, led by one of the great powers that were competing, which was the United States. That was the fact. And it is very good for mankind, growing to becoming wealthy society, democratic society, and stable society. Now, is it possible, whatever the nature of the great competitions in the coming 2 decades, but the basic trajectory of humanity will follow the example of the past in that sense, growing toward more stable, wealthier, and more open society. Of course, in stages, but the trajectory, you cannot escape from it. Kishore.
I must say that's a great question. And the big question you're asking is, overall, when we're looking at our world, should we feel optimistic or pessimistic? And I can tell you that I personally remain violently optimistic about the future. And you know, the reason why I gave you the statistics about the middle class population in the CIA countries, how we went from 150 million to 1.5 billion, that's an indication of tremendous progress in 20 years. You know, never before in human history have you seen such advancement. But what's interesting is that if you look at the history of the world since the post-Cold War era, you can describe it in terms of economic phases. And certainly the biggest economic change that happened in the post-Cold War era was the re-emergence of East Asia, right? Starting with Japan, after World War II, it recovered, and then the Four Tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and then, as you said, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand also did well, and then China opened up. And so all of East Asia has taken off in the last 30 to 40 years. And that's one big change in the global system. That's on the economic side. But on the geopolitical side, you also had some major transitions. So first you had the Cold War, starting around 1948-49, right until 1990, 1991, when the Berlin Wall, after the Berlin Wall collapsed. And then you had a unipolar era. In the Cold War, you had a bipolar era. In the post-Cold War era, you had a unipolar world where the United States dominated. But now we're entering a multipolar era, where there are many powers, and it's a much more complex world, by the way. And in this complex world, it will also provide challenges and opportunities. And it certainly, the world is looking for a leader that can guide this multipolar world. In the past, it was the United States that could have done it, you know. But the United States today, partly because it is a domestically troubled country, and the United States, by the way, used to be a leader in signing free trade agreements with countries around the world. Now the United States cannot sign a free trade agreement with any country. It's shocking. And by contrast, China, which is run by the Communist Party of China, can sign free trade agreements. You know, I mentioned all this to you to emphasize that the world that is coming towards us is very complex and very complicated. and you have to understand the nuances carefully if you want to understand the world of tomorrow. Right? There are no simple black and white descriptions that can fit the state of our world. But having said all that, I still remain, as I said, violently optimistic, because I think the future for Southeast Asia, for East Asia, is still very, very, very positive. And by the way, also for India. India is a country, by the way, that is going to do very, very well over the next 10, 20 years. India somehow or other, there's an American expression, has recovered its mojo. It means you recovered your vitality. So India is now thrusting forward and under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi in a very strong way, which is quite good for Southeast Asia. Because as you know, for the past 2,000 years, Southeast Asia has been influenced by two major civilizations, China and India. So if China does well, I think China will do well. And if India does well, Southeast Asia will do well. So we will benefit. So in that sense, that's why I'm optimistic for the future.
Thank you, Pak. So we can be optimistic or pessimistic, depending on where you stand. But let me remind the audience, the politicians, the members of parliament, that the direction of the world can suddenly turn in the way that was never thought possible before. He mentioned about the First World War. Lesson from the Second World War is was the offspring of First World War. The most important, in the sense of historical event, was the First World War. Until the last days of the ending of the peace, this is August 1914, more than 2/3 of the members of the British Parliament, the cabinet was led by Prime Minister Asquith, then they did not believe that war between England or Britain and Germany was possible. Germany was the largest trading partner of Britain. And Germany then, led by the Kaiser Wilhelm II, was the rising economic power like China it is now. Nobody believed that war could happen between these two neighboring countries. But war it did. And the destruction of the world for 4 decades after that, the rise of Hitler, the rise of fascism, and communist revolution, right? Nobody thought it was possible before. What we have to do now is to be guarded that history does not repeat itself. Okay? So that's why we have to learn. We have to listen to voices like Pak Kishore. Okay? So as a future leader of the country, you know how to navigate Indonesia. You know how to do what Bung Hatta said long time ago. Mendayung di antara dua karang. Okay, Pak Kishore, I will turn now to the floor.